Season 3 of The Boys is pretty mediocre on its own merits, but sets the series up to crash and burn in the upcoming seasons. Much like Season 2, the show continues to fail to capture the magic of that first season. Before I get into the review itself, this show is new enough that I think it's fair to issue a spoiler warning for this season's and all the ones previous, just to cover my bases. So, spoilers from here on out, and without further ado. The show's themes of generational and parental trauma continue to be the strongest aspects of the story. Butcher, Homelander, and Soldier Boy get a lot of play in this department as we see how their respective parental figures, or lack thereof, shaped them into the cold and callous men they've become. There are some interesting parallels drawn between the trio, although I really wish they had just been explored a touch more to really flesh out the implied comparison. Huey gets some great scenes reflecting on his relationship with his own father, although it is unfortunate for how often he is mentioned that Simon Pegg barely appears in this show. I enjoy what the show attempted to do with MM, although the execution was really weak. Soldier Boy just killed his family, and it's conveniently never been mentioned until precisely now. Frenchie and Kimiko were, in this season. Frenchie's always been my least favorite member of the main cast, and he just has nothing to do in this season aside from waste time, really. Starlight is becoming an increasing annoyance with her virulent refusal to just fucking kill Homelander at this point. It feels more frustrating than anything, because at this point it just feels like we're artificially extending the show's runtime, but more on that later. Stunningly, Ryan makes it out of this season as having perhaps the most interesting arc for him set up in the next season. As far as character writing goes, I think the show remains mostly solid. The show's excessive viral marketing makes it almost impossible to not talk about the episode Herogasm. While I did think this episode was particularly strong as a narrative beat within the story, I feel the actual shock value of the episode was greatly oversold. Aside from Love Sausage's massive prehensile penis, very little of the supposed graphic sexual content in the episode was any modicum of memorable. In that front, I must confess I was a little disappointed. The only scene in the entire season which I found genuinely kind of shocking and uncomfortable was when the soup termite crawled into that one guy's penis. That's a big problem, as a lot of the hype around The Boys is couched in the ridiculous gore and shocking moments. Although the fight scene at the end of Herogasm between Butcher, Homelander, Huey, and Soldier Boy is absolutely top tier, and I suspect the reason the episode is so well received, rather than its mediocrely graphic content. Now, if I really wanted to, I could spend 20 plus minutes breaking down every weird little story beat or filmmaking detail that bugged me, like how Crimson Countess straight up just blows someone up at Votland and we really never hear about it again, but I think that's missing the forest for the trees here. The real issue with this season is that it feels incredibly formulaic. Just like Season 2, we spend the first half of the season assembling the team after a year of dicking around. A new immortal villain soup is introduced for the season. The immortal villain soup teams up with one of the main characters, only for said main character to realize that the immortal soup is in fact a piece of shit, and then beats them but doesn't kill them in the season's final episode. Now, I wasn't really a fan of Season 2 already, but to see Season 3 do basically the same shtick again cements that it's not really a me problem. This is a continuous, repetitive issue that will presumably continue to plague the show in future seasons. The whole final episode was just really underwhelming, aside from that very, very last scene, which I will admit was pretty chilling and gives me a little hope for interesting developments in the future. This season was not helped by Season 4 being confirmed just after the release of Episode 4, so already any perceptive viewers knew that the stakes of this show could only shift so much because there would be a guaranteed 8 more hours of content. And that brings me to my main concern with the show. With every passing season, the threat of Homelander will seem more distant and more insurmountable. That's part of the reason I take issue with Starlight's attitude, because it just draws out this show. If the show keeps throwing in new seasonal soup villains, eventually they're just going to feel like ass pulls. Victoria Newman seems like a logical enough choice, but who else is there? Another immortal soup from the 1940s? A clone of Homelander? At some point, it's just going to get ridiculous and start to wear down my suspension of disbelief more than it already has. And yes, I am aware of the irony of using suspension of disbelief to describe a superhero show. Shut up. Another thing that worries me especially is that Eric Kripke's last show, Supernatural, lasted for 15 goddamn seasons. Now granted, network television and streaming are very different means of delivery for content, but if The Boys remains popular, I suspect we'll keep seeing more and more seasons, and the goalpost of defeating Homelander will move further and further away. At the end of this season, I really feel like we got nowhere, aside from the Ryan stuff, which really only came to fruition in the last minute of the last episode. Quite frankly, the best part about this season was giving Butcher brain cancer, because it sets a time limit on his life. Even then, it's television trope number 1 that a character with some kind of terminal ailment survives for long past their expiration date. It's also probably easy enough for Butcher to just take some compound V and be cured of his brain cancer or something like that. I don't know. As I see it, the only feasible ending to The Boys is Butcher and Homelander both dying, and the show's runtime is directly tied to both characters' livelihood. And the only hope I have is that with Butcher being out of the picture, that'll bring the show to an ending even quicker. I should reinforce, I still enjoy this show, I just have a couple of concerns for the future of it because of its own internal longevity.